Hi everyone, my name is Ankit. I'm one of the co-founders and the CTO at Postman. Really excited to be here. Today we're going to talk about the evolution of APIs and how it intersects with the present and the future of AI. Shortly, I'll also be joined by Brian Gilbreth, who's the Director of Engineering at Fox Corporation, who's going to talk about it from their organization's perspective as well and shed some light on this topic. In addition, we'll also be talking about three principles for building high-quality APIs at scale and how we see leading-edge organizations build a winning API strategy on top of these principles. So, of course, it's not going to be a presentation in 2024 if I don't say the word AI at least 100 times. But I think what we also need to realize is, AI has had an active role in shaping a lot of our lives and how we interact with technology each and every day for years now. It's embedded in the devices that we use. It's behind the ads we see, the things we buy, where we go, how we get there, the information we consume. For years, we've had machine learning algorithms that have been predicting, learning from our behaviors, adjusting in real time, and predicting what we're going to do next. And that all is AI at work, and it's been around for a long time before that seminal ChatGPT moment from 2 years ago. And it's something that's only starting out. In fact, since we have codified this industry of AI, we now project that this AI market globally is going to exceed $1 trillion by 2030, compounding at 36% annually. Even from Postman's unique vantage point, we have seen a significant increase in AI-driven API traffic over just the last 6 months, a 73% increase. OpenAI continues to be the dominant AI-related API with 79% of the overall AI-related traffic going there. Simultaneously, we've seen Mistral AI grow by 88 times in the last 1 year, Perplexity grow by 79 times in the last 1 year. And, but I think one interesting pattern that we have seen is this diversification of how the API landscape is being driven by these purpose-built AI tools reflective of users seeking tools that meet specialized value propositions. And I'm really excited to see how this evolves over the next 1 to 2 years as well. So we all know that AI systems are trained using large volume of data. But it's also important to acknowledge that this data represents what has already happened in the past. For the AI to be truly powerful and for it to be in the present moment, it needs to interact with real-time scenarios and real-time information. And that is where APIs come in. We like to think of APIs as kind of like the hands and legs of AI that bring the thoughts or the predictions of AI-generated models and puts them into action. When you combine generative AI with APIs, you are able to enable more sophisticated, more nuanced interactions between humans and machines. APIs make AI actionable in the real world. Let's see an example of this in a real-world scenario. So, an example that I think all of us will understand. A global e-commerce company using an AI chatbot for customer support, supporting across multiple countries. So we have the AI chatbot that uses natural language processing and also an understanding of user-specific scenarios and what to do when these things happen. But then it relies on APIs to access product databases, shipping status, and even translate the conversations to make it contextual for, let's say, a Japanese-based customer. In essence, what you see here as an outcome is AI providing the conversational intelligence, the understanding of the user's pain point and the context, while APIs ensure accurate, timely, and localized customer support for the users, creating a compelling combined user interface for them. Let's actually take another example. We've probably all seen the movie Her. I know it came out about 11 years ago, talking about this whole interactive AI-based interface. And if you see, in this screenshot, you see Joaquin Phoenix talking to his Scarlett Johansson AI, Samantha. And he's sitting on a bus, and in this example, let's say he's trying to plan out, his dinner, but he wants to check what kind of restaurant he can go for, but he needs to find out what his account balance is for this. And the way that this would play out in the real world right now is, talking to Samantha, Samantha asks you to take out your phone, you open your browser, you do, username, password, you do multi-factor authentication, and that's when you find out. But this is not what the experience that was promised to us. The experience was this beautiful conversation. I am melancholily, looking outside the bus, talking to Samantha, but now I'm sitting here entering multi-factor authentication. And I believe that we are at the precipice of fundamentally new consumer experiences that are getting created. We don't exactly know what consumer experiences will win, but we know there is going to be an AI and conversational component to it. But existing technologies and APIs that exist to support them also need to evolve to support the kind of interactions and consumer experiences that we want to put together. Interestingly, there are a few solutions already out there. In fact, and in places that we might not even think of. This, what is represented here, is what is called as silent authentication. It is something that is being implemented by multiple different vendors. You've seen probably the biometric keys that show up on your laptops. But simultaneously, even in the telecom industry, there's an idea that if any of you were using my phone, my telecom provider knows that I'm not using my phone. And they've also proven this out as an industry standard that it's more secure than your username, password, and multi-factor authentication combined. We, of course, cannot expect our bank interfaces to become less secure, but we can evolve the way that we think about APIs to enable these fundamentally new consumer experiences. And in this example, what you see here is the ability to actually have that more human-centric conversation using an evolved API design and authentication paradigms to actually power some of these consumer experiences. And in addition to these changing consumer patterns, what we also are already seeing is generative AI transforming the way that we work with APIs. For developers, something that we see quite a lot, it simplifies and augments their interactions with APIs, whether it's for debugging and testing, whether it's for documentation, whether it's for design of APIs. But for non-developers, people who, it significantly lowers the barrier for entry to build and interact with APIs, making this foundational technology of our generation far more accessible. And the reality that we are seeing is that the future of every organization depends on APIs. Companies that lack APIs or the ones that are not designed well or not discoverable are going to become increasingly invisible in a world where AI-driven conversations or interactions are the norm. Philosophically, this is not too different from what happened when crawling and search became prominent when Google came about, and the businesses that did not optimize for it eventually started dying out. If your company's APIs don't exist or are not discoverable, not documented, not machine readable, or not easy to consume, the ones that are win. And that's why it's important to think about your APIs as you think about the world in terms of AI. And this is a pattern that we have seen in the past with every major technological shift that has happened over the last few decades. We've seen APIs becoming more important. In fact, a step function more important. Started with the advent of the browsers, towards the mobile phones and the app ecosystem, towards cloud computing and decomposed architectures, microservices, serverless, and so on. And with each one of these fundamental innovations, we saw an exponential rise in the number of APIs. And we expect, and are already seeing many signals of the AI-centric explosion to create more and more APIs in the world. At Postman, we have been very uniquely positioned to see how APIs have evolved over the last decade. What you see in this chart is how companies across different industries over the last 10 years have actually just started in consuming way more APIs than before. What's really interesting about this chart is if you look to the left on the y-axis, you'll notice that it's actually not a linear scale, it's a logarithmic scale. And the reason why we had to make it into a logarithmic scale is because there was so much disproportionate that we wouldn't have been able to plot all these industries in the same chart. And what that makes it interesting is that the delta that you see between 2014 and 2024 is actually orders of magnitude of growth, not just linear growth. And I think that's really interesting. And that also to us points at the opportunity that a lot of industries have in front of them to get ahead of this upcoming evolution in the way that organizations are doing work. And I think the three broad patterns that we see with respect to APIs and how organizations think about them. There are public APIs that can be consumed with the right licensing and that can be accessed by anyone and built on top of that companies expose. There are partner APIs that are specifically designed for your strategic partners, and you put some specific entitlements in place, allows for organizations to work with each other and create really unique differentiated experiences sometimes for your consumers outside. And finally is the big chunk of the iceberg, the private or the internal APIs that are not visible to the outside world. And we see that companies use these three kinds of APIs in very interesting, different ways to power goals that are now strategic to their businesses and the way that they're thinking about it. Think a grocery chain organization opening up consumer behavior data as analytics and making it available as a high-margin business revenue stream. Think telecom industry opening up the 5G network itself as programmable APIs for third-party developers to build on top of. These are the kind of innovations that we are seeing happening around APIs all around the world. But what's also happened simultaneously is this, with this explosion of APIs, organizations get into from tens to hundreds of thousands of APIs across the private, public, and partner ecosystem, the complexity of working with them has also increased significantly. And we see these patterns show up all the time. Whether increased silos of developers working on different systems and not being able to work with each other across different business units, across geographies. Whether it shows up in an entirely new class of people who are now suddenly interacting with APIs, especially as companies start selling APIs. You see product managers, you see partners, you see even go-to-market, sales, solution engineering, support teams who are now suddenly interfacing with APIs. And finally, we are engineers. We love making things more complex. Why stick to one technology? Of course, the broader, API portfolios in most organizations have also expanded significantly. We've gone from the worlds of SOAP to REST to now, portfolios of GraphQL, gRPC, asynchronous communication, and so on. And all of these things actually become really hard to manage. And I think that's where what we are seeing increasingly this pattern emerge of this gotcha to the AI boom. So we spoke about every technological advance and API started becoming more important. We now see AI definitely improving developer productivity. I hear this metric all the time where developers are able to ship things faster and you see anywhere between a 20 to a 30% increase in individual developer productivity. What that has led to is more APIs getting created in the world, and we see a lot of that. But simultaneously, that increases the API sprawl. That increases the risk of integrating all of these systems, creating more brittle, sometimes less secure systems, and massive performance bottlenecks that come along with it. And that fundamentally decreases the productivity gains that you have tried to unlock with AI. And what's really interesting, maybe some of you agree with this and have seen this already, is when organizations have adopted more AI for increasing their developer productivity, when the systems work with each other, overall, the projects have actually not started shipping faster. So maybe an individual developer is more productive, but the organization as a whole, the team as a whole, is not as productive, especially across multiple different iteration cycles. And that's the gotcha to the AI boom. And a lot of it comes down to ineffective collaboration where all these systems have to integrate and connect with each other. And that's one of the reasons why we evolved over the years Postman to become the platform for secure API collaboration at scale. Our customers find that when structured, thoughtful API collaboration, exponentially improving their productivity, leading to higher quality APIs that get used more. Over the last decade or so of our existence, Postman has now become the largest API development platform in the world, used by more than 35 million developers in more than 500,000 organizations, including 98% of the Fortune 500. This also includes Postman becoming the largest network for APIs in the world, where the best technology brands in the world makes their APIs available to their customers. So at this point of time, we have established that APIs are essential. So what I want to do is talk from our significant customer base and all the interactions that we have had, the three principles that we have seen towards building quality APIs at scale and allowing you to stay competitive in the age of AI. First, it's important to think about your APIs as products, like you think about any physical or digital products like your website, like your mobile app that you might have. Building your APIs as products and not just as technical artifacts enables you to position them in the market, to sell them, and to actually generate tangible returns from them. And the greatest products that we have seen always combine technology and design solutions with meeting the needs of the consumer while simultaneously also advancing the needs of the business. So great products bring these four facets together: technology, design, consumer understanding, and a business understanding and why you are building in this thing. And all of these together allows you to build great APIs. And this shift in mindset is something that we have already started seeing. We run probably what is the largest API survey called the State of the API Report. And what we saw is 62% of our respondents actually report working with APIs that already generate income for their organizations. In fact, 21% of the companies, APIs drive over 75% of their revenue. This, to me, marks a significant shift in the way that APIs are being viewed, not just as technical enablers, but also as strategic revenue-generating products. And to build great products, you need to deeply understand your consumers. Who are you solving the problem for? Why are they facing this problem? How are they doing the things right now? What are they trying to achieve? A deep internalized understanding of our consumers allows us to build APIs that meet the needs of the consumers as opposed to building wrappers on top of technology that we have already built out. The second principle of building great APIs comes down to API collaboration. And this is where I spoke about. APIs are fundamentally collaborative. They allow people within your teams to work with each other, cross-functional teams to work with each other, teams across your lines of businesses to work with each other, organizations to work with each other. Yet, this whole idea of actually working with each other, collaborating, is actually fraught with a lot of unnecessary friction. And to back this up, actually, this is what we heard in our survey as well. There are real barriers towards developer productivity. We found that 39% of the developers have inconsistent API documentation, and that is their number one roadblock to their productivity. The second statistic is really interesting. 44% of the developers have to actually dig through other people's source code to understand APIs, but more than half already have to collaborate with product managers, designers, QA, who don't understand the code, more importantly, don't even have access to it. And 43% of them have to actually physically rely on other developers to explain them what this API does. And that is how we work with APIs, this foundational technology that builds around it. We see this company, Toast, who's one of our customers, using an actionable, always up-to-date documentation portal that actually allows their organization to become significantly more productive, saving more than 2 hours per developer per week. And one other thing to also think about is collaboration is not something that always happens after your APIs have already been built, which is where we spend a lot of time just building something out there, putting it out there, and then getting feedback, which is great. But there is a better way. There's a way to build iteratively. If you aspire to build the perfect API on day one, you can sometimes be too slow to capture value. People find other ways of doing things. They have to do their work. Instead, building iteratively and collaboratively with your customers or consumers allows you to validate your solutions early, allows you to get important feedback, allows you to build trust, and as a result, build a great product. And the best way to think about this, and I've met many great product teams over the years, and they always talk about spinning this cycle over and over many times. And that's what leads to a good product being built out, even the first version of it. And you can spin these first few cycles faster with prototypes. What we find sometimes is teams often spend months building out minimum viable products to get validation. But you can actually substantially reduce the learning time to days or even hours by just doing prototypes. Prototypes help your teams learn faster and cheap and bring you in front of your consumers. And I'll share a couple of examples. We'll talk about that with Fox as well, but I'll share a few examples in the next few slides also on how we see organizations doing that. And collaborative API mocks are a great way for you to prototype APIs and get feedback and spin that cycle early. And finally comes the third principle, which is developer experience. Developer experience is the same idea as user experience, where your users are developers. APIs, if you've ever interacted with them, can genuinely be really hard to figure out. They can change unexpectedly, and having a stellar developer experience can be a fundamental competitive advantage that your business has towards building successful APIs. But every time I talk about something conceptual like this, it's like, oh, this is a framework, philosophy, whatever. Tell me how it becomes practical. So I always ground myself in some metrics to see how organizations implement it. And these are the 4 metrics that I've heard repeatedly organizations telling us on how they measure developer experience for their APIs. And in this, I will talk about, while talking about these metrics as well, I'll also share some examples of how organizations optimize for each of these. We'll start with the first one, bounce rate. So bounce rate is something that I'd actually heard from Google. So the way that Google started defining bounce rate was somebody coming to your developer portal, generating an access token, probably verifying their email, authenticating, doing all of that stuff, but failing to make a single successful API call. And when they started measuring this number came out to be as high as 40 to 50%. And this is something that I've asked a lot of companies building developer portals sort of measure, and what they realize is number always is really, really high. Imagine this: you've spent all your time building out a great API, building the developer experience, optimizing and putting resources, and somebody who's come in showed intent and cannot actually make an API call. Why? 3 big reasons come out. Number one, authentication authorization is genuinely hard. It can be a hard problem to solve and really hard to figure out. Second, we love to drop developers into reference manuals. It's actually really hard to figure out what to do with the reference manual. Where do you start? And third, as I mentioned before, is not everybody comfortable with using an API directly, and a lot of people ask for UIs. One of the things that we hear a lot, which I thought was really interesting, was that most of the APIs, interestingly, are experienced inside Postman for the first time. Because somebody is taking their developer portal and opening the developer portal on one side, opening Postman on the other side, and translating that HTML into this thing. So what you can do with Postman, and which actually a lot of these great API brands do, Twilio, Stripe, OpenAI, and Meta, is you can actually create that auth flow inside Postman itself. Anybody coming in trying to just enter your URL you create a beautiful experience for them that allows you to configure their. So instead of seeing OAuth 2, they see OpenAI authentication, or they see Facebook authentication, and so on. Our customer MasterCard actually uses a Postman workspace to make their API documentation actionable for their partners and consumers. They combine reference documentation with a really useful quick start guide that you can just start with this, just starting making the few API calls and get the baby steps forward to actually start experiencing your API. And the third thing that I mentioned is not everybody is comfortable using APIs. In fact, Cisco found this out. Cisco is very publicly an API-first organization. You see them all over their website, they'll talk about it. But what's interesting is Cisco's consumers of the API are actually network engineers or network administrators, people who are actually very, very smart with networking and going on site, pulling out these screens and doing all this magic, but actually are not trained on JSON. That's actually been a legitimate blocker to adoption for their API. And the way that they designed this experience, for their APIs is actually their engineers and administrators now don't see the response being the JSON. They actually see tables and pie charts and different ways of experiencing the API, suddenly making the API far more accessible to a wider range of people. This is another example from the financial services industry, where again, the concepts can be really hard to figure out. And oftentimes, a lot of the concepts around financial services are not understood by developers if you're allowing and opening it up for third-party developers, but also simultaneously, maybe for your own internal developers. And what this organization does is actually embeds an explanation of what the API and what the concepts are, and embeds it right within the response of your API, just making your API far more accessible right there with explanations and tooltips of what these different concepts do. It's all about making sure that APIs are accessible to everyone. The second metric, a complementary one to bounce rate, is called the time to first call. The time to first call is the time it takes for somebody expressing intent to consume your API to actually making the first call successfully. What we saw is PayPal actually integrating Postman very deeply with their developer portal and reducing the time to first call to less than 1 minute, something that used to take hours for their developers for any developers coming to the PayPal portal to figure out. The impact and the outcome of this was so outsized, they actually had their CEO talk about this on an earnings call, talking about how much their API adoption has gone up by optimizing for this specific metric. The third metric, which is an extension of the time to first call, is what we call as the time to value. This is what you call as the moment of value realization, not just the first call. That is when somebody has actually successfully traversed some sort of a user journey that you have designed for them, and it is always a composition of multiple API calls, not just a single API call. It is the duration of time it takes for a user to realize the tangible worth of your API in their work. And a great example of this is the WhatsApp team over at Meta, which is one of the most popular APIs on the Postman network with more than 100,000 users who have forked their API. This team designed a phenomenal developer experience by creating getting started guides that are complemented with different examples of how to use their API. They optimize not just for first-time user experience, but also for continuous developer experience. And this is true for all of Meta's APIs right now, whether it's WhatsApp, Instagram, Facebook Messenger, or even Threads. And what's really, really interesting about this is the time to value has sort of created like this PLG, product-led growth, kind of like a funnel. When developers come in from different organizations, they start consuming their API, they run through the different journeys that were designed for them, we've optimized for the time to value. This now serves as a leading indicator for their business teams to prioritize which customers to engage deeper with, and also just creating this whole motion to operate at scale. So kind of think of it like a PLG phone funnel that then translates into a sales-led funnel to optimize against. That's how you can create a self-sustaining API program as well. And the final metric that I'll talk about today is time to wow. I've heard two variations of this, time to wow or time to delight, which is a more expressive version of time to value. It is the duration between a user experiencing your API to the moment they experience that profound realization of its potential or benefit far exceeding their initial expectations. It's that wow moment, like, you know what, this is doing something magical for me. So I'm going to show you a very interesting example. This is, again, from a financial services company that is trying to create a whole bunch of APIs to incorporate different kind of risk profiles and model this around commodity markets and so on. So as you can imagine, fairly complex concepts. But they're still kind of evaluating and testing out the different ways in which this API could be useful for their customers. And coming back to this whole consumer-driven API example that we spoke about, when you have a bunch of ideas, you want to bring some sense of tangibility to them. So what they have done here is an example of quick prototyping, but not just of individual endpoints, of the whole story, of the whole narrative of how it fits into your workflow and what are the different things that it does. And once it zooms out, I'll show you exactly what this is. So what they've created here is a whole crisis management simulation system using a combination of different APIs, some of them which are third-party APIs, some of them their own proprietary APIs, and some of them are APIs that don't exist yet, but they're still building it out, but they're able to sell it. They're able to get feedback against it, and they're actually able to create a whole market for it and figure out what the right set of APIs and capabilities that they want to build out by understanding their consumers before any APIs have actually been built. A hugely successful model of implementation. So to summarize today, you can't do AI without APIs. I think these things go hand in hand, and APIs become even more critical to business success than ever before. We see many patterns around public APIs expanding markets, private APIs fostering collaboration between different organizations, and partner APIs, and private APIs fostering innovation within organizations. APIs at scale can be hard. Managing and evolving them does need care. It needs strategic thinking, and it needs good tooling to support effective collaboration. When you think about your APIs as products, it requires a deep understanding of consumers and the jobs that they are trying to do and how they are doing it right now. Improving productivity starts by reducing friction to API collaboration. Otherwise, all the gains that we have unlocked through AI doesn't work anymore. And finally, having a metrics-driven approach towards developer experience forces your teams to prioritize and allows for clear alignment with business goals. And again, what I mentioned before, great products are always about meeting the technology and the design with the needs of the consumers and the needs of the business, and it's something that's always important to understand. And we have seen some phenomenal revenue-generating models being generated out of that. So with that, I would love to invite on stage Brian Gilbreth. So Brian is the Director of Engineering at Fox Corporation, where he oversees client-facing digital engineering, enterprise architecture, and AI projects. With over 15 years in digital media, Brian has led major streaming initiatives like the 2023 Super Bowl and FIFA Men's World Cup, delivering innovative solutions to millions of users. Brian, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, and hold on to this. Yes, now I'm going to rely on my cheat notes. Okay. So Brian, tell us a little bit more about Fox and your role.
Yeah, so Currently, I'm an engineering director at Fox, Fox Tech, which is underneath Tubi Media Group. We manage all the technology that powers all the Fox brands, like Fox Sports, Fox News, Fox Business, Fox Local, Fox Weather, all those Fox branded properties. And we provide all the technology that makes them run.
Amazing. And can you share a little bit more about the different kinds of APIs in Fox?
Yeah, so the org over the last few years has really moved to a microservice architecture where the teams have found that as an efficient way to build and decouple the engineering teams and to make the APIs much faster, development-wise, not performance-wise. So a lot of our hot path APIs are RESTful JSON, and a lot of the kind of internal systems use the pub-sub approach, notifications, topics, that kind of thing.
Very interesting. Actually, like the broad API portfolio that I was talking about in my session as well. No, it's really interesting. It's also been amazing to see how the partnership between Fox and Postman itself has evolved over the years. We would love for you to share a little bit more about your history with Postman and how we initially.
Yeah, so we were talking earlier. I used Postman starting, I think, with your first app in 2012. It was just a simple, basically, it just emulated curls, right? It just sent out posts, and then over the years, did other things and came back, and it was this whole ecosystem collaboration tool. So I rejoined Fox. I was at Fox before, then I was at AMC Networks, building all their streaming, and then I came back to Fox about 3 years ago. And when I came back, the engineering groups had grown so large that each group kind of had their own way of doing things. So there was no easy collaboration across the org. So I just started small and got out a credit card and got a simple license for Postman for my own little engineering team. And then as the years went by, it just started to grow and grow just by people seeing us use it within the organization. And then it really, I think, came ahead during the 2023 Super Bowl. I kind of used it as a baseline tool to test the Fox Sports Super Bowl setup, and kind of threw it in front of everyone on big screens, showing uptime for our systems and everything. So that's another thing I think people don't realize Postman can do is it can monitor APIs, and it can run test results and communicate with other services through Newman and other systems that it has. So
what made you realize collaboration was something that was a problem that needed to be solved?
Well, just when I was onboarding myself, I didn't have a good way to learn APIs, and everyone's like, "Oh, it takes months and months and months to get to learn how all these groups do all these things." And just from working at my previous jobs, when that happens, you can add weeks, months to projects just because people start sending each other different wikis, different text files, people emailing Swagger files to each other, and this kind of stuff. It's a hamper on the project that doesn't need to exist, right? So when I came into Fox, I saw that all these teams are doing it differently, and I'm like, why is it so hard for me? I've been doing this for, at that time, 13 years. Why is it so hard for me to learn how to do this, let alone a new engineer coming into the group who's never experienced any of this stuff? So that was kind of the sign. I was like, well, maybe I'll try to take this on.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And we see this all the time. I think, the inability to onboard people in an optimized way, how much time does it take to just do back and forth on these assets?
Yeah, sure.
That oftentimes can be, old or deprecated or incomplete, and you just waste a lot of cycles.
Yeah, and if you're sending links to wiki files or PDFs, whatever, I think your org is in the wrong spot, right?
Yeah.
So.
No, so I think we also, covered a lot of this idea of new innovation, cloud, microservices, now AI, triggering this exponential growth in APIs. I was curious, what have you seen in terms of API growth in the last few years at Fox?
Yeah, so at Fox, we're doing hundreds of APIs a year, which accounts for thousands of endpoints with new projects or new business units that come on board. So, part of that is creating developer efficiency, right? When you have all these APIs, developers aren't doing what they love to do, which is code if they're trying to hunt down all these APIs that they need to find, right? So allowing that efficiency to allow the developers to have a collaboration place where they can commit changes to their APIs and discover other internal teams' APIs, I think is critical. Because just with that, when you're talking about thousands of engineers, hundreds of thousands of APIs, if each team has their own way of doing it, like good luck, right? Having all these different teams try to work together.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. How are you guys approaching AI development and using APIs in that process?
So, a lot of the AI stuff that has been getting made internally, what we've kind of found out is I think there's been a lot of focus on the outputs of APIs. So, what a consumer might use, like if you're using an LLM, right? The actual API that you use to talk to it. But I think within Fox, there's been a real focus on developing the internal endpoints and services that actually power the inputs. These are the things that, the APIs that generate the models and actually make the magic work behind the scenes. So documenting all those for internal developers has been even more important than I think the end consumers, because once you've got all these things running, you've got a lot of expertise and you want to capture it and document it.
Yeah, no, totally 100% agree with that. One of the things we also spoke about today is about prototypes and how they help teams quickly get started and build iteratively. I would love for you to share how the Fox team uses prototyping as part of your processes, and how can other teams use prototyping for parallelization?
Yeah, so that's one thing also coming into the org for a second time is I think this is probably the story that every engineering organization has experienced, right, is the front end is always waiting on the back end. They can't start until the back end's done. The back end teams have to push all their stuff up to a dev environment. Then the clients communicate with it, and then it's wrong.
Yeah.
And then they got to go back to the back end team again.
Yeah.
And then this takes weeks and months, right? And it's always one team blaming another. So what we started to do was using the mocking feature in Postman. First thing out of the gate when we're building a new service or a new product is we've kind of established this pattern. I'd call it like a table stakes baseline pattern of what's the contract between the front end and the back end team. It's a JSON object. If that's what it is, okay, great. Put it in as a mock. You guys have 1 or 2 sprints to agree to kick off the project. And with the mocks, you can just go in and just like Word or Excel, right? You just go in, save some text and hit save, or you can do it just like Git and do pull requests and merges. And once the front end and back end teams agree to that, right? That contract's established. The back end teams build to that mock, and the front end teams can consume it right off the Postman. This is a Postman.io mock server. So now you've got these 2 work streams working in parallel, and that's cut the project, by 50% or whatever, right? Because now you don't have to blame another team for not having it done. It's there.
Yeah.
So, and then if the front end team wants a change, they can, just talk to the back end team. They can go into the mock and change it, and then they're on their way, right? And this sounds so simple, but it's kind of funny when you see a team not doing that now, and they're waiting on another team. Like, why wait?
How do you think the idea of prototyping or mocking is better or different for you compared to, let's say, creating like a wiki or a documentation that probably may illustrate a similar thing?
So in terms of, Fox is a large engineering organization that's global. We've got teams all over the place working in different time zones, right? So being able to decouple how teams work with each other and not having one rely on the next is pretty important. So, when we're building a product, right, let's take a Fox Sports product, right? You've got 12 plus apps, right? You've got a iOS, Android, Roku, Fire TV, et cetera. They are all a superset of devs ready to go. You've got your back-end services, right? You've got your kind of content, your authentication and identity, and e-commerce services, right? They're ready to go. So if the team is blocked, right, you're talking about dozens of engineers just sitting there, not working, right? So you need to unblock them, right? And I think establishing the contracts between these two teams and having a mock, it allows everyone to work, right? And that's what I think engineers like doing, right? They like coding and developing.
So, Fox, as you mentioned, is a global organization and a huge presence around the world. I think, what are some of the things that your team has done to just make remote asynchronous collaboration easier?
Yeah, so obviously, I think Postman as a tool is kind of in each developer's little toolkit, right? They download their IDE, and then they download Postman. And then within Postman, right, you've got kind of the workspaces and collections, right? So each team kind of has their own workspace, and they're able to share and collaborate that way. We've seen a lot of great work with, or improvements when we've got to work with outside organizations, third-party vendors, or those kinds of companies, where a lot of our APIs are private, right? They're internal only. So being able to expose or cherry pick specific APIs that only they need access to in certain circumstances has been really important. So we use the partner feature, and they don't need access to 100,000 APIs. They just need access to the two that they're working with. So we can pick those out, expose them, and it's great that all the APIs have the variables established, all the endpoints, environments. So they can just go in and hit run, and it's there. There's not a huge learning curve. Not reading through all this documentation. The actual interaction is the documentation.
No, I think I sort of touched upon that as well, right? Most of the APIs in the world are actually experienced inside Postman, an application like Postman at some point of time, and I think that makes a huge difference. If you make it easy for your suppliers or customers or even partners to also onboard them onto.
Yeah, especially I'd say like complex flows, where you've got different microservices interacting with each other with different, maybe post requests or header parameters or URL parameters, right? Things that aren't obvious. If it's all there and you just hit run, there's not much to figure out, right? And especially using the collections. You had some pictures up earlier, right? We like to put them in stepped order into a folder, especially like complex processes like authentication, right? And you just hit run on the folder, and each request passes data to the next request. And to a developer coming in, they know how the whole system works within 30 seconds, right? So they don't need to dive through like all these
I've
documents.
sometimes heard it like being referenced as actionable documentation. And
Sure.
Got it. So, I mean, in my presentation, I also showed like a financial services company using this Postman flows thing as a signal on which APIs to build. I know you guys use flows in a very interesting way to improve developer experience. Just would love to know what challenge your team was facing and how you've implemented.
Yeah, so we've had the teams that have really gravitated to flows are the teams that have to demonstrate or express super complex workflows, right? So, let's just take, for example, an authentication flow. That could be dozens and dozens of microservices that have to pass specific variables and meta to each other, right? In specific orders. So if that was just all laid out in an open API spec, that doesn't have the context of, well, which one do I do first? You might assume, okay, maybe the login endpoint does first, but maybe that's the fourth one you got to do. So that's, I think in the past, if you were just looking at traditional documentation, that'd be very insider knowledge. You got to talk to some senior dev that built it and say, okay, use this one first, that passes it to this one, and take that object, take that string, pass it in the header to this one. So that takes time, right? And when you can see flows and it actually visually shows you, okay, here's a GET request. This passes it to this. This is a post that goes here. This takes that ID and passes it here. You can actually see it's like visualizes it, right? So it's especially good for non-technical people who want to understand this, maybe like product managers that want to understand the system that they're inheriting, or new engineers that are just starting. They'll get it within an hour, right? Just seeing how everything flows and the whole thing, which might take months before, right? Trying to learn the ins and outs of a complex flow and system.
No, I think we see that a lot of times. It's just this idea of like visual storytelling that brings everybody on the same page in a very quick amount of time. And by doing that, you just like, everybody's on the same page, and these are the blocks that prototype, these are the blocks that exist, these are the blocks that you probably need to go buy from somewhere, and you connect that whole thing into like an end-to-end customer's perspective and user's journey to support that.
Yeah. And we're talking like systems that look like subway maps, right, when they're visualized. So imagine trying to communicate that, back when I first started, trying to communicate that to a new dev.
Yeah.
Like, how do you communicate a New York City subway map, which is text? Like, that to me is very difficult. You need to actually look at the map and see what stations you're going to and stuff.
I like that example.
It's very similar, yeah.
That makes sense. How do you, and last question from me, like, how do you anticipate additional flows to improve developer experience at Fox?
Like flows within the program?
Like just for you guys, like, is there any other innovation planned around how you?
So one big thing that started to catch on this year is a lot of our QA and SDET folks have started using Postman as their main testing tool. So I think that kind of came naturally after seeing all these APIs documented and interactive in Postman.
Yeah.
Then it just took a few senior engineers to kind of show how it was done. You can go into there's a little test tab, right? Yeah. And you can start writing this JavaScript to throw errors and pass fails and that kind of stuff. So it was right around the Super Bowl last year that started to kind of kick in because everyone wanted to see like, are our systems passing, but in a visual way, right? And obviously you could do that through all kinds of testing programs, but I think a lot of these devs that are already in there know JavaScript and they know all these, they don't need to learn yet another framework.
Yeah.
And all the APIs are there, so they can just go through and write the tests for each one.
Yeah.
And what's cool is that it's not just contained within Postman. They're connecting it up through Newman, the client application, and it's shooting out test results to our messaging systems, our data platforms, of like what's running, what's failing. Especially great for like kind of regression and uptime performance, right? Yeah. Are our systems working the way they should be? And I know there's a lot of other systems that do this, but they're already in Postman with all the documentation. So it's just another click of a tab. And that's really taken off to where I'd say it's the majority of the testing and QA teams now use Postman as their main kind of regression tool.
Great. Thank you so much, Brian.
Yeah.
This was super helpful. I think we still have another 5 minutes. If there were any questions, happy to take for either Brian or me.
Well, thank you for having me.
No, thank you so much.